Hi everyone, thank you for joining me and thank you very much to Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland who invited me along last week to speak to them. Zoe wasn't, we didn't expect to be speaking 2 weeks in a row, and I'm afraid Zoe wasn't available, so that's why she's not with us today. I really thought I'd just take this opportunity to highlight the campaign I started in March of this year, and what I want to do, what I want to happen through that campaign. The campaign is called Witches of Scotland. It was started on International Women's Day this year, International Women's Day 2020, and it was set up as a result of the coming together of a number of factors in my life, I suppose, that led me to start the campaign. The first is that I am a lawyer who works in the area of miscarriage of justice cases. So I'm a lawyer who goes into the appeal court in Scotland, and I argue where people have been convicted. I argue if they have been wrongly convicted and make that argument on people's behalf. So that is something that's very dear to my heart, the interest of justice. I always have been a feminist, couldn't imagine being anything else. And so something very dear to my heart as well is equality for women. And that's something that I've always felt very strongly about ever since I was young. So putting together wanting equality from women and wanting justice for women, I also stayed and still stay on occasion and work in the Old Town in Edinburgh. Now, the Old Town in Edinburgh is, of course, where the High Court is, where women would have been sentenced, not exactly the same buildings we have now, but the foundations of the building were there at the same time. And just a short walk up the street, and where I often take the dogs, is the Witch's Well, which is a memorial. No, it's not a memorial, sorry, I'm falling into the trap myself, which is a plaque which talks about women. The reason I say it's not a memorial is because although it remembers women, it remembers them as witches. What it says in the what it says on the plaque was that 300 women were executed, killed here as witches, and then goes on to say some used their exceptional knowledge for good and some for evil. So it wasn't an acknowledgement that these women had suffered a terrible miscarriage of justice. It was just, in fact, a small plaque saying women were killed here as witches. Now, I had always felt annoyed at that plaque and what was said, and the fact that it was so small, the fact that there were statues around the Esplanade, a number of statues to various different men, but none to record the fact that 300 women had suffered a terrible miscarriage of justice. But it wasn't until one day that I was walking around Princes Street Gardens with my 2 wee dogs, and all these things sort of were bubbling under in my mind. And I came up the Princes Street Gardens to where there's a full-size statue of a bear. This bear was called Wojciech, and he was apparently a very good bear who did lots of things in the Second World War to help the war effort. And I was standing looking at this bear, and in the background, in the backdrop of it, there's the castle. And I'm looking at the statue of a bear who's been memorialised, we remember his name, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, there were 300 women killed right there, and there hasn't been so much as an apology, there hasn't been a pardon, and there is no national memorial to these women at all. They have just been obliterated from history. And it was that in high dudgeon I stumped home, and I wrote the Witches of Scotland manifesto, I suppose. And the Witches of Scotland campaign wants 3 things. It wants, first of all, a pardon for those women who were convicted as witches. Now, I don't know whether or not you've seen perhaps recently in the media, there's been a pardon for the miners who were convicted of various things during the miners' strike. And previous to that, there was a campaign, a successful campaign to have those people that were convicted of homosexual acts under those laws at the time to be pardoned. So there is history for pardoning people, including people who are no longer with us. Because I think one of the first things people say to me is, what's the point in pardoning somebody that's already dead? But in fact, we have already acknowledged the positive thing that comes from pardoning people which are dead, which is properly remembering their memory. And if we don't properly remember the memory of these women, they will always be witches. They will always be women who are convicted of witches and have the status of witches. And of course, as the Orkney Memorial says, they were just folk. They weren't witches. They didn't deserve to be convicted as witches. They deserved to have their name cleared. So that was the first thing that the Witches of Scotland campaign wants. It wants a legal pardon for these people. The second thing that it wants is an apology. And I hope I can exemplify this by the case of sometimes what's called the Tory born witch, Lilias Eadie. She was a woman who was accused of a witch. She was, we probably think, tortured, although we don't have good records as to it. We think she was tortured, and she confessed to being a witch. But what she wouldn't do was name other people. And after a month and a day in custody awaiting her trial, she died. Now, she wouldn't be affected by a pardon, because a pardon only pardons people that are convicted of things. Whereas what I want is to see everybody who was both charged as a witch and also who was convicted and also who was not convicted to receive an apology. And the reason for that is when women were accused of being a witch, first of all, many of them, I say women, there was 15% men as well, but many of them were convicted of 4,000 accusations that started. We reckon around 2,500 were executed as witches. So that leaves us a considerable, that leaves a considerable number of people who were accused of witchcraft but were never convicted for various reasons, like, for example, Lilias, who died after torture, or some people who were acquitted. But those who were acquitted suffered another terrible fate, which was people still believed that they were witches. They would be socially ostracised. People, even who didn't believe they were witches, would be scared to be friends with these people for fear that they were alleged again, and people would suffer the same fate. So the people who were accused but never convicted also suffered terribly, and of course they would have suffered torture. So I want an apology for them. So a pardon, number one, an apology, number two, and the third thing that I think is appropriate is a national memorial. Now, I understand the Remembering Accused Witches of Scotland want a memorial, and they want to have a memorial which they raise funds for, and they keep themselves, and I applaud them greatly for it. As Sarah said, or Sarah, sorry, who spoke before me, said, memorials to women should be everywhere, and I am all in favour of as many memorials and as many memorials to women who are convicted as witches as possible. What I'm wanting, however, and it's slightly different from the Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland campaign, is a national memorial. Now, the reason that I stress the national memorial is because that is a memorial which is paid for and kept by the state. It has the significance of the fact that the state shoulder the burden. I suppose indirectly we all do, but the state shoulders the burden of both putting it up and keeping it. And to that end, when we're seeing a national memorial at the Witches of Scotland, we want that to be paid for by the nation, and that's why in Witches of Scotland campaign we're not looking for a donation. In saying that, of course, I would encourage anybody who wishes to donate to the Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland to do so, because I think that every memorial to witches is a very, very good idea, and I know that they've already done fantastic work in that regard. Those are really the three things the Witches of Scotland campaign want to happen, and we want to ensure basically that as many people as possible get to hear about this, because when I started off telling people that I wanted this, people, some people agreed immediately. Thought it was a great idea, knew a bit about witches. Some people responded with a great degree of scepticism. But when I talked to them about it, they were like, yeah, why shouldn't these women be pardoned? Why shouldn't they have a memorial so we remember what happened to them? And I was able to give them examples of where beautiful memorials have been set up in Norway. Now, I don't know, the name of the one in Norway is Finnmark, and it's really worth looking up on the internet. It's a beautiful, beautiful memorial to 91 women who were killed in Finnmark, and their name is mentioned on the memorial with any information that was known about them. So they're actually named on that memorial as well. Sadly, a lot of the time, we won't be able to name all the women because simply records don't exist. There are some records that just say a number of women were killed, for example. So anyway, so I think that memorialisation of women, as Sarah has said, is vital. It's very important. I think that what we need to do, or what I am trying to do, is spread the campaign word as much as possible, so that when we get to, and I've already drafted some stuff, I will be implementing that soon, when we get to the stage of asking people for their assistance in supporting the campaign, so that when their MPs are asked about it, so when the Justice Committee is asked about it, the politicians know that there is support for it. So that's the next part of the campaign. I should say, in order to, I suppose, let people know what we're doing and keep the campaign live, what we have done is set up a Witches of Scotland podcast. If you just go to witchesofscotland.com, you can get all the links there to Twitter, to Insta, to the podcast, to let people know what we're doing. And every week what we do, I think we started this in week 2 or week 3, is we decided to name women who were killed as witches. So every week we either take a group of women or individual women, and we say what they were convicted of, what date it was, and any other information that we know about them. So we try to remember their names. I do think what Sarah has also said was very interesting, and really, really chimes about the fact that when we honour our war dead, which of course I'm also absolutely in favour of, that we, everywhere we go, if there's a local town or a local village that honours those people, there is a reference to that somewhere. And I think that should be done, and I also think it should be done for women who were convicted as witches. So I think any town or village where a woman was convicted as a witch, there should be some kind of remembrance of that, because I think it's very, very important. It's a very trite thing to say, but the truth is that those that don't remember history are condemned to repeat it, and we must make clear to everybody's mind the horror of what happened to these women, the injustice that they suffered, in order to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And lastly, what I would like to see is the Witches of Scotland campaign is gone broader than in Scotland, because we have been in contact with a lot of countries abroad, some of whom who no longer have witchcraft, and they have plaques and memorials, but some of whom unfortunately still have witchcraft, either officially a crime, or sometimes unofficially. People are being accused of witches and either being ostracised or stunned for that. Sorry, that's my dogs you can hear in the background, the same dogs that were with me when I was stomping about Princes Street Gardens. I think it would be an incredible thing for Scotland to do, to send a message out to the rest of the world that we remember our women, we acknowledge the wrong done to them, and that we want to, that we pardon them, we apologise to them, and we memorialise them. And it will send a message out to those countries where witchcraft is still being used as a tool of persecution, that we think that that is very wrong. So hopefully that takes us the allotted time. I don't want to go over the allotted time. Sarah, how am I doing? You are doing fantastic, and thank you very much for coming on and doing that again this week, because it actually really clarifies what your campaign is about.
and how it's different to our campaign. So that didn't come across last week, and I think it's really come across this week in terms of your campaigning for a national but paid for monument, and that's something that we need to discuss. And we're campaigning to get as many memorials around Scotland as possible, but also a national memorial. If we can fundraise for that, that would be fantastic. So
yeah, well, as I say, I'm absolutely in support of you. The plaques are absolutely fantastic on the from Torryburn to Curis, or Curis to Torryburn, depending on which way you're walking, and it's fantastic work you've been doing, and I support it greatly. But I do think that the state should make a strong statement of a memorial to women, and I think that if there's, I mean, I'm not an unrealistic person. I know that money is going to be tight in Scotland for a long time, and I don't think that if there's money to be spent now on doing good for women, then that money should be spent now.
They should get it. Yeah.
They should get. But I do not want to see one more statue go up to a man before these women
I agree.
Get an so that's what I mean. I'm realistic, but that's I suppose the difference. But in saying that, it's only because I think that should be a particular state thing. Does not mean I don't think that there should be other memorials. And the work that you've already done is fantastic, and I'll be supporting you all the way with anything else you decide to do.
Thanks very much, Claire. That was brilliant. And that's very nice of you to say that. And we of course will be out with, when your pardon is ready to be campaigned for, we'll be there behind you.
Grand. Thanks for all your support. Thanks
Sheila.
A lot.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for attending our first virtual conference and for listening to the speech again. Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland began in 2018. Due to the coming together of two wise women, Councillor Kate Stewart and Local Studies Officer Sarah Kelly. Kate having an interest in Lillis Adey, the accused witch of Torryburn, and Sarah having a general interest in the witchcraft trials. They came together at a lecture that Sarah had organised in Dunfermline. But Kate had read an article by Professor Julian Goodacre about the lack of monuments to the accused witches of Scotland. This she shared with the attendees at the lecture, and it became clear that a memorial was felt to be a good idea. Leslie Riddick, broadcaster, journalist, activist, and generally terribly busy woman, suggested and arranged for them to meet with Professor Julian Goodacre, Dr. Louise Yeoman, and Dr. Liz Ann Henderson. And they had a very spirited meeting. And out of that, the need for a conference was suggested. So Sarah and Kate took this on with others and created Fife Witches Remembered and a very small private Facebook page. But the first conference and the Facebook page was extremely popular, especially the conference, which was held in the Glen Pavilion in May 2019. And it was a great day and had lots of interesting and very informative activities, and stories were told. The outcome of the day was that a group was needed to take forward the following ideas from the conference. 1, to raise awareness of the accused witches of Scotland. 2, to create and maintain a national monument to all those accused. 3, to gain a full pardon for those found guilty of witchcraft in Scotland. And 4, to gain an apology from the Scottish churches. Awareness raising isn't a problem. All of you here today are testament to that. However, a lot of hard work needs to be done to achieve the other goals. And a massive amount of time has already been spent. Sarah has been the driving force for the first conference, as she has been today, getting this conference together. And Kate, along with the West Fife Heritage Network, researched the story of Lillis Adey and shared it with the world. They put together the Accused Witches Trail, which was successfully launched on the 5th of September in Curis. The time between the first conference and the launch of the trail on the 5th of September was spent having regular Zoom meetings where we became a constituted group with a new name, remembering the accused witches of Scotland, RAWS for short. And we are in the process of applying to become a registered charity. I was honoured to be and asked to be the first chair. In doing all this, we have become aware of other like-minded people and groups and growing our following on Facebook and Twitter, beyond our imaginings. We feel that it is important to support others and work together to achieve our goals. To that end, we invited Claire Mitchell QC and her newly formed campaign for a pardon, Witches of Scotland, to launch open the Accused Witches Trail. The launch went off very successfully with a large number attending, most of whom duly signed up as new members. This is a collaboration we hope to continue and grow, as is our association with other groups, including the Orkney Heritage and Memorial Group, and all those who have contributed to our conferences past, present, and hopefully well into the future. Being involved in this project has been an absolute joy, due to my interest in Scottish history and indeed the history of women, but I find myself fascinated and disturbed by King James VI and First. King James was such a good propagandist. He legitimised the witch trials and his belief that the devil was his greatest enemy and he himself the most godliest of kings and a mighty warrior against the devil and his witches. This time of year has its links with the witch trials and King James. Halloween, the time when people, young and old, become interested in the supernatural and witches with their broomsticks, black cats and pointy hats, as well as bonfire night on the 5th of November. Remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. This marks the anniversary of the discovery of a plot organised by Catholic conspirators against, including Guy Fawkes, to blow up the Houses of Parliament in London in 1605. Many people light bonfires and set off fireworks to this day. And I am sure many advertising or propaganda campaigns nowadays would be as effective and last over 400 years. But in Scotland, between 1536 and 1736, sorry, I said that wrong, I always do, I don't know why. In Scotland, between 1563 and 1736, witchcraft, being a witch, was a crime to both church and state. This was a great challenge. This was a time of great social change for Scotland. The move away from the Middle Ages into the early modern period and then on to the Enlightenment. Approximately 4,000 people were accused of being witches. Around 85% of them were women and 15% of them were men. And not all the accused were executed, but 2/3 of them were. Being accused put you in terrible peril. You could be let off, as Lily Sadie had been, and then years later be accused again, and that time not be so lucky. As you might have become an outcast in the community for the suspicion of being a witch, and your behaviour might have made you a quarrelsome person. Then, due to the horrific torture, and at the very least, the walking and waking, when you would be kept awake for days and had a couple of men making you walk round and round and round until your feet bled. The minister would be shouting at you that you were the servant of the devil and your immortal soul was at risk. This was the most common form of torture to get a witch to confess and name other witches. Sleep deprivation has been outlawed by the Geneva Convention, but many of the other forms of torture that were used during this time are still used in parts of the world today. King James took a personal interest in the witch trials due to his betrothal to Anne of Denmark and her being unable to sail to Scotland because of stormy seas. As James also suffered difficulty in stormy seas when he went to Denmark to collect Anne. When he reached Denmark, he found that the King of Denmark views were that witches had attempted to prevent the marriage, and with James being so godly and good, the devil had it in for him, and therefore he believed that Danish and Scottish witches were out to get him. The Berwick witch trials followed, and James took a personal interest. He tortured lots of them, leading to innocent people, mainly women, being strangled and burnt at the stake. It was believed witches' power came from the blood and that burning would purify the soul. And it also meant that the witches would not be able to return to their bodies and do more evil. King James, it would appear, liked to use burning bonfires as a punishment. Bonfire comes from the Middle English word banefire, which means a fire for burning bones, bane being the old word for bone, and bonfires were originally used for burning bones, an occasion for burning people convicted of heresy, witchcraft, and for Guy Fawkes, treason. King James, being so godly and learned, brought us 2 books, the King James Bible in 1611, that includes the line, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," and also demonology in 1597. From his experience during the Berwick witch trials, his demonology was essentially a handbook on how to thwart the devil. This gave a mandate to hunt out witches, which he believed were the detestable slaves of the devil. With King James' belief, he was such a good and godly person, and therefore so was his country. We, the Scottish people and nation, have always been proud to be Scottish, and I believe we are strong enough to come to terms with our past and what our ancestors did, no matter how awful. We must reckon with the past, but we need to be careful and not impose modern day standards on the past. The power imbalance during the time of the witch trials has to be recognised, and those brave, innocent people caught up in all the hysteria need to be remembered and given back their dignity. Remembering they were victims of an injustice, they were individual people, and bringing their stories to the public's attention is, I believe, particularly important. We cannot know about ourselves as a nation and relate to each other in a meaningful way until we know about our shared history. For me, the witch trials hunts took place in the 16th and 17th century. Don't feel like it was that long ago in history, and a lot of the circumstances and social change that took place that allowed this to happen are reflected in the world today, just that it's a different enemy. A memorial is a signal that we remember and learn. After all, as it says on the Forfar Memorial and then the Orkney Memorial, they were just folk. I hope you enjoyed today's programme and that everything else runs very smoothly. Thank you very much for your time.
So Lisa,
one of the things we should mention maybe is the witches' plaques for the witches' trail.
The Accused
Yes.
Witches Trail.
Anybody in Scotland wants to have a bronze plaque to mount wherever they feel is a fitting place, the artist is available to make them up, and the foundry will cast them. So we thought it was quite a good way of marking the Lily Sadie. But the artwork could be anything you like.
yeah, Donald, how much did it cost roughly to get those 3 bronze plaques made? Just to give people an idea.
Kate Stewart there, she knows, I think.
Okay, so but that would be interesting, I think, because
it was thousands rather than hundreds of pounds.
Yeah,
but that's to pay for that work, the whole thing. Whereas now it will just be plaques that's already sort of there, and just changing the artwork.
So Jane's put on it was over £10,000, so it's quite a lot of money to raise. But we have experts here who've done it.
Can I come in, Sarah?
Yes, you're there, Kate. Hi.
Yeah, it's just to say that over 10,000, that included the website for the Coast and Countryside Rangers, which was the most expensive. The plaques and that are not that expensive. I'll get the details because I've got an email somewhere from months ago, but it's not as expensive as that. The guy was really reasonable.
That's That's
But
good to know. So it's the website that's the most expensive
award
bit.
is the website. So that's all included in the costs that we had to fund. And that's how it came to over 10,000. But a big majority of that was to do with the website. So I'll try and get the exact details, but the artist would be no problem. And as I say, it was more than reasonable. Okay. Yeah.
Brilliant. And there's a chat there that says we got 25 bronze plaques for Dundee Women's Trail within 10k. So that's really good.
Yeah, you would do that. Yeah.
So I mean, and we certainly
yeah.
think that's a really positive and important thing, is to not only have the, like, and as Claire and Sarah already mentioned, and not only to have the National Memorial for all of them, but also to tell their individual stories, and little desks that do that seems to be the way to go. It's, you know, and they are beautiful, and also there are lots of memorials out there that, you know, you can go and see, and we are thinking about, we are going to be working with Emma Carroll, who will be talking later on in the programme about the map, you know, about collating a map for all the memorials, so people can actually find out where they all are. So there's lots of other things we're doing, not just the 4 main things. And I really need to not talk.
Oh, I'm now. I'm now going to pass over to Lillian. I hope she's ready. And if you give us the same kind of talk as you gave us last week, Lillian, that would be fantastic, because we were all so moved by that. So if you can do a repeat performance, I'd be very, very impressed. Thank you.
Hi.
Okay, I'll hand over to Lillian.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for all the films and interesting things that people have been doing and saying today, doing over the years and saying today and letting me know about. Thank you. I'll do a couple of the things that I did last week because I'm reading other people's work. But the reason that I was interested to talk on this is because I think that the notion of collective trauma and how it affects all of us through our ancestral lines, through our DNA, is as important as the effects on our culture of such an extraordinary time of terrifying persecution. And it's not something that's just attached to the witch trials. I think it's also attached to what happened during the Second World War and the First World War, the level of absence of the grandfathers and the grandmothers that could teach about herbs is all tied up with the way in which persecution comes from belief systems and their integration with plagues, famines, feelings of unworthiness, incredible levels of suspicion of the other, and an unwillingness to actually do what, at that time that they happened in this country, people were meant to be practicing Christians. Now, it's quite difficult for me now just to sit back and laugh for a very long time about that notion. What is a practicing Christian if you're supposed to be loving your neighbour, forgiving your enemy, turning the other cheek, and believing in an unconditionally loving God? What has that got to do with the way that you treat people who might have a different belief system from you, but even the ones that didn't have a different belief system and might have been operating on it were just too sexy or too different looking or too challenging to be dealt with by the village worthies? And it's still a problem in some areas. It's just a different subtlety of problem. So the first thing I'm going to read was written by someone who was writing to the people of Forres. Her name's Sherry Kenham. Sherry Kenham. And it's possible for me to send anyone that wants a copy of this. It was not witches who burned. It was women. Women who were seen as too beautiful, too outspoken, had too much water in the well. Yes, seriously. Who had a birthmark. Women who were too skilled with herbal medicine, too loud, too quiet, too much red in her hair. Women who had a strong nature connection, women who danced, women who sung, or anything else really. Sisters testified and turned on each other when their babies were held under ice. Children were tortured to confess their experiences with witches by being fake executed in ovens. Women were held under water, and if they float, they were guilty and executed, and if they sunk and drowned, they were innocent. Women were thrown off cliffs. Women were put in deep holes in the ground. The start of this madness was years of famine, war between religions, and lots of fear. The churches said that witches, demons, and the devil did exist, and women were nothing but trouble. As we see even today, there's often a scapegoat created. Everything connected to a woman became feared, especially her sexuality, became labelled as dark and dangerous, and was the core of the witch trials throughout the world. Why do I write this? Because I think the usage of words are important, especially when we are doing the work to pull these murky, repressed, and forgotten about stories to the surface. Because knowing our history is important when we are building the new world, when we are doing the healing work of our lineages. And as women, to give the women who were slaughtered a voice, to give them redress and a chance of peace. It was not witches who burned, it was women. I'd like to add to that there were also men. Then I have seen on the chat the possibility that 15% of the people who were tried were men. But the effect, the resonant effect, is an effect on women, because the majority of the people who were accused were women, many of whom were healing women. Women who helped with childbirth, women who understood herbs and how to heal. If you're a Reiki practitioner at the time, you would definitely have been for the Burnley fire. It's not funny, actually. It's horrendous, the effect that it's had on people, whether male or female, who have psychic abilities, healing abilities, or can see. As was mentioned earlier, Helen Duncan was done for seeing folk that had already drowned and telling their mothers about them when the government didn't want them to know. The same government that it was using the Wiccan groups in England to protect the borders of our islands. Winston Churchill asked his occult friends to get the witches of England to protect the shores of the land. And at the same time was prosecuting someone that could do nothing about it. If you look at the work of Thomas Hubble, Dan Pearce, who've been doing research into how we gain knowledge that affects the way we operate in the world, they have discovered that you can be affected in the womb, not just as a fetus, but as the egg inside the fetus. That if your great-grandmother is traumatized, then it's not just her daughter that might have the effects, but her daughter's daughter or son might have the effects of inherited trauma. Collective trauma is that kind of inherited trauma inherited by a whole nation. So if you think back from yourself to the people behind you, let's say your parents are standing behind you, and then behind them, their parents, and behind them, their parents. How many people have we got already in this train of people behind you? Or your precursors, your ancestors, whose trauma has been passed down the family line. And if you were in the same village and you all suffered the same trauma, then there's a collective trauma for the whole village. And if all the villages in the area suffered that trauma, then the trauma is there for the whole of your area. I'm the daughter of a Polish refugee and a Scots mother. My Scots mother came from Callander, where Helen Duncan lived. And my mother's been afraid of her own psychic abilities ever since she was a child because of what happened to Helen Duncan. But not just because of what happened to Helen Duncan, but because still people are going to say to someone who has psychic abilities, you're a witch. And they don't mean that as a good thing. They don't think of the notion of the white witch, of the being who connects with nature, who has an understanding that we are not just part of nature, we are nature, we are imbued with air, earth, wind, fire, breath, and are inherently connected with all things, all beings. Hello to the Amazon, where the people from the Amazon rainforest have been sending their seers down from the mountains to let us know that we really need to be taking care of the earth. Now, see if you're folk that don't want the earth taken care of because you want to pillage it, because you want to own what's not yours, then you make sure you get rid of anyone that can see. Here in the land of the seers, they got rid of us all. Foolish, foolish, foolish thing to do. Because in my world, people who die, people who pass out of their physical bodies, don't die. They become another form of life that we call the ancestors. And the ancestors at the moment are on the move. It would seem they're on the move pretty strongly in favour of honouring the fact that more than 3,000 of our great, 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 great grandmothers were murdered for being something that was unacceptable. But it was about power as much as it was about anything else. It was about different ways of creating control. And of course, we're living through another period of manifest control taking of some kind or another, within which, thank God for April and May, the deep silence allowed us all to connect with nature in a manner that's been virtually impossible since the time when the women were tried, and their names obliterated as much as possible from history, in the same way as pharaohs that followed pharaohs they didn't like used to try and obliterate them from history by wiping their names off the pyramids, because your name's a power tool, because your name is something important. Whereas in the Crucible, is it that the main character will not give away his good name. He will not say he is following the devil. Now, even if people had actually said that they were Wiccan or witches, they certainly weren't following anyone that they regarded as the devil. The patriarchy simply turned the matrifocal power systems into devils that they could ignore. So the green man became the devil. The great mother became the wicked witch. I know the way you can get when you have not had a drink of love. Your face hardens, your sweet muscles cramp. Children become concerned about a strange look that appears in your eyes, which even begins to worry your own mirror and nose. Squirrels and birds sense your sadness and call an important conference in a tall tree. They decide which secret code to chant to help your mind and soul. Even angels fear that brand of madness that arrays itself against the world and throws sharp stones and spears into the innocent and into oneself. Oh, I know the way you get if you have not been drinking love. You might rip apart every sentence your friends and teachers say, looking for hidden clauses. You might weigh every word on a scale like a dead fish. You might pull out a ruler to measure from every angle in your darkness the beautiful dimensions of a heart you once trusted. I know the way you can get if you have not had a drink from love's hands. That's why all the great ones speak of the vital need to keep remembering God. So you will come to know and see God as being so playful and just wanting to help. That is why Hafiz says, bring your cup near me, for all I care about is quenching your thirst for freedom. All a sane man can ever care about is giving love. It's a poem by a man called Hafiz. And it was love that was deeply missing in this Christian land. When its good Christian king decided to have a go at the women. And it still affects us all. It affects the whole of Europe, actually. A level of disengagement from nature and from the power of the Great Mother, from the movement of love and life and all green springing, while they concrete over the fields and poison the crops. However, it's a great deal of hope that we need to get through this. So what I'm hoping is that we will actually be able to manifest the kind of love that is required to honour these women and men who were sacrificed to the God of their power, nothing to do with peace, love and rock and roll. But that what Daniel Pearce was saying when I was listening to him on the collective trauma conference was, as soon as you begin to acknowledge that there is a collective trauma, the healing begins. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. You've done it again. You've done it. It's really great to reflect on these issues and to think about people who are still being accused of things today. So you kind of bring it to the forefront and make us think about things that we, you know, from my point of view as a social injustice historian kind of thing. That's not necessarily what I focus on most of the time. So thank you very much for doing that. That is brilliant. Thanks a lot. Right, well, if there's no questions.
No questions, not at all.
There's no questions.
No questions, not at all this
Can
time.
can I please say something?
Yes, who's that, Janet?
Hello. Yes, and I'm joining the forum from Australia, from Queensland, Australia. So it's like 1:30 a.m. here.
Oh my God, it's just giving me
Dedication.
nightmares.
Oh look, it's just been a joy to hear all your Scottish accents, and I'm just so dying to get back to Scotland. But we've got this COVID thing, so maybe in a couple of years' time when it's all sorted out. But during the COVID period, I did some more family history research and discovered that I have an 8 times great-grandmother who was executed as a witch. She was one of the 7 witches of Torryburn.
Oh.
Wow.
And so that has really spooked and really affected me quite deeply, actually. And so that's why I'm joining in. And I just want to say thank you very much, because there's been so many fantastic and beautiful presentations tonight. And I think it was Sarah Sheridan that said there's just that emotional connection to these witches when you realize that your, ancestor went through all these absolutely horrible persecutions. It's really quite overwhelming. But I guess the fact that I think I probably would have gone for a witch as well has probably sort of got my intrigue in it as well. But the 7 witches of Torryburn, do you know much about them? Have they come up before you? I just wanted to just ask that question, because I'm really feeling like I really need to ensure that she and the other 6, particularly in 1666, are sort of noted and have this chance of getting some recognition and pardon.
Who wants to? Is Kate around somewhere?
Yeah, I'm around.
Hello.
Hello. Just to let you know, I'm from the Torryburn area, and my focus has been on Lillis Sadie, which was 1704, but Lillis was still around in 1600 as well, 1666. So we can find out more about that. I'm sure, Sarah, we can do some research and maybe get in touch with Sarah, and we'll follow this up for you with some information.
I've actually done some research myself. I sort of have a research background, not in family history, but other environmental stuff. So I'd very much like to send what I've found through to somebody. But yeah, anything else would be great. She was Griselle Anderson. And I get the impression that there was some connection with Lilias Addy, even though Lilias was 1704. I read somewhere that she had sort of intimated that it had been Griselle that had introduced her in some way to, witchcraft or whatever. But I would very much like to send what I've got anyway through.
Yeah, Sarah, could you sort of give details for an email address?
Yes, go Sheila, because we'll use that one. Yeah.
Yes, so we have a group email that anybody can send any requests or information to. It's remembering, all in lowercase, SAW2019@gmail.com. It will also be in the list of information that we're going to send everybody at the next week sometime, that we've a list of books.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to hearing from you.
Absolutely.
That's a good one. Anybody else want to say anything? If not, then
Any questions in the chat?
no.
No, all
Eggshells.
done.
No.
They're all done. Oh wow.
Thank you, Donald, for doing that.
Clever,
It's
Donald.
quite easy this week compared to last week.
Right, I am going to say thank you yet again and say goodbye. It's been a fantastic thing. We are hoping to have a live conference in May next year, but if that doesn't happen, we will have one in August next year. So keep an eye out on the Facebook page, on the Twitter. We'll have press releases, etc. as well, and on our email address if you don't hear anything from us. Okay. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.